Hey guys, I know it's been a while since I posted. I tried to do a stream of this video and that didn't work. But today I decided I'd talk about something a little bit more serious. And that's about kind of the rise of eugenics and this general kind of eco-fascism, white supremacy, a lot of other movements kind of tied to eugenics that are on the rise because of the coronavirus. So obviously, me and currently a lot of the country are currently in lockdown basically. Me and my family aren't leaving the house. There's a lot of medical shortages and inevitably a lot of questions are coming up about what to do when there aren't enough ventilators, which are they're assisted breathing devices, which are needed for the coronavirus because it's a virus that affects your lungs and means that you need a ventilator or an assisted breathing device in order to help treat and survive. So currently hospitals are facing some huge shortages in ventilators, and one of their responses has been to invoke a set of laws available in a lot of states. It's been most highlighted currently in New York, that says that in the case of medical emergencies, ventilators, there's this law enacted in 2015 in New York, ventilators can be taken from disabled people who use ventilators to live their everyday life because of breathing related disabilities. So if you didn't know what eugenics was a movement. It was really popular around 1920s to 1940s-ish, off the top of my head, because I've studied eugenics, but I'm not looking it up right now, so that's what I remember. And basically it was a movement that said that disabled people were a burden on society, and that they had to be weeded out and kind of destroyed. And it said that to get a better human race, you needed a race that was free of disability. And disability wasn't just defined as what we would call both physical disabilities, but also maybe developmental and intellectual disabilities. Disability was also defined as stuff like alcoholism. It was defined as women who were seen as very expressing their sexuality. It was seen as gay and LGBTQ plus people. Basically, it was also seen as poor people, uneducated people, basically anybody who wasn't considered up to the standards of society was considered disabled, because there was a belief that all of those things like poverty, were actually hereditary, and that poverty could be passed down from generation to generation through genetics, and therefore if you were born poor, you could never not become poor because it was part of your genetics, and therefore you were a burden on society, just the way if you were an alcoholic, according to them, or if you were a very sexual person, even if you were a woman who'd been raped a lot, you were counted as this person who had this genetic disease. So the eugenics movement in the USA, ended up taking the approach of both forceful sterilization, which is stopping doing permanent surgical processes or procedures on disabled people, sometimes without their knowledge and almost always without their consent. Basically always without their knowledge or consent. It was doing these forceful sterilizations on them so that they were unable to have children. It was also trapping them in institutions, often for life, where many people died because of disease and sickness, and there was a huge amount of abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse within institutions. And so all of that was happening in America. So obviously the idea of eugenics is also really linked with race, because one of the things is passed down genetically is race, and that was the thing that was seen as an inferior trait and something that meant you were in the white supremacy movement, that you were a lesser human being. So a lot of that sounds maybe really familiar to you. Maybe you're thinking, wow, I feel like I've heard of the idea of breeding the perfect human race. That's because the ideas of eugenics ended up helping directly, kind of, I don't know how to say this. Hitler basically took from the American eugenics movement. There are letters going back between Hitler and various Nazis to eugenics movements, pre the actual World War II, pre the Holocaust, and he said that he wrote Mein Kampf kind of basing it off those ideas, specifically of American eugenics, and that when American eugenics societies praised Hitler and praised what he was doing, some of the first people killed under Hitler's in concentration camps and death camps were actually disabled people. Before they were killed, there was a forceful sterilization. Forceful sterilization was implemented, which was in 1933. And then a couple years later, in 1939, Hitler approved the first a medical experiment, which was considered almost like mercy killings, because Hitler and the Nazis said that disabled people's lives were a burden to both society, like a drain to society, but also they were like a burden to themselves, and that it was merciful to kill them. And so those were some of the first people killed by Hitler during the Holocaust. It's approximately 70,000 disabled people from Germany and Austria died because of this program. And when that program was first created, first, it was originally just the killing of disabled youth, children, and especially like babies and very young children. America wanted to adopt the same policy, and that policy was almost actually voted on and became a law, but luckily it didn't. But the point of all this is, eugenics has like a huge like history of evil. It's like linked to all this stuff, and specifically, the eugenics is the idea that disabled people are somehow a drain on society, and that they have less of a right to live than other people. These policies in New York and in other states are saying the exact same thing. They're saying that disabled people are somehow a burden, that they deserve less resources, that they deserve less of a life because their life is less valuable under these laws. Not only that, but in New York, it is currently illegal for any medical professional to do a mercy-assisted or an assisted suicide killing, which is basically, it's very similar to euthanasia. It's the idea that if somebody under your medical care says, I'm in so much pain and suffering that I would rather die right now, those medical professionals are legally not allowed to help that person kill themselves. And so that question is, why in New York are they saying that someone cannot choose to end their own life because of their suffering with the help of medical professionals, but the medical professionals can murder disabled people by taking their ventilators, which they cannot live without their consent, and give them to other people in need of care. No person should have their ventilator taken from them when they already have one and are using it to live. And it creates a system where disabled people are unable to trust medical professionals who are often echoing and quoting the same facts about eugenics that have been quoted for generations. Basically, right now we're in a really scary time, and there have also been people like, Dan Patrick and Donald Trump who either implied or directly said that older people and also disabled people, or even if they've not said it, implied also disabled people, should be willing to sacrifice their lives right now. And they should be willing to die if it helps the economy. And that's also eugenics in action. You're saying that people who you see as lesser because maybe they have weaker immune systems, maybe they can't help the economy in the way you think they can, because often disabled and older people aren't working in the workforce to the same extent because they aren't able to. They're saying that those people, because they cannot economically help the country in the same way, that they should die, and that should be a willing price. Millions of lives of people, that should be a price for the economy doing well. Basically, the stock market doing well. And that's eugenics, and that's an evil idea, because not only is literally right now 20% of the population in America has disabilities. That is a huge amount. And think about how many of those people, think about how many old people there are. Think about your grandparents or your great-grandparents or your uncles and aunts or anyone you're related to. That makes up a huge percentage of the American population altogether. There is no way for the economy to do well if all those people die. And also it's irrelevant, because no matter how well the economy is doing, we can't just say that we want over 20% of our population to die so that you can go back to work. And it's not only that, it's the idea that if we did that, the amount of cases would skyrocket to such an amount that if you got into any other life-threatening accident, if maybe you got into a car crash, which is an extremely likely thing to happen, or you were hit by a car, you couldn't get the medical care you needed because the hospitals would be so full of people with coronavirus that the medical professionals would not have the supplies or the people to help you. And therefore, what you're really saying is you should be willing to sacrifice every single person in our country, essentially. Every person who could end up with a life-threatening disease, with an accident, anything, they could not get the medical help they need. It would destroy the entire system. It would mean that there is no way for the economy to work like that if we're always living in fear that we can't get the necessary medical help we need. It's not possible. And so basically, these laws, I think, are currently being challenged in New York and other places. They're being sued, I believe, and it's really important to remember that no life is less valuable than another person. We've been convinced by capitalism and by our system that somehow our only worth comes through making money and helping the economy, but we have worth as human beings, every single person. Disabled people have a right to live. They have a right to they have a right to their ventilators. They have a right to their bodily autonomy. When you take a disabled person's ventilator, in the same way when you take a disabled person's wheelchair or touch their wheelchair without your consent, you are violating their bodily autonomy. You are violating them. And they have a right to their bodily autonomy, and they have a right to live. They have a right to go to medical professionals without fear that their ventilators are going to be taken and they're going to be murdered by a system that says that's okay. And we have to stand up for disabled people. We have to say over and over again, and for the old people in our country right now, we have to say over and over again that we are not willing to stand for 20% of our population dying for the sake of the stock market, that we are not willing to stand for potentially us and our friends and anyone we know dying for the sake of our stock market. And the best thing to do right now is both to donate to organizations, to make sure that you're not hoarding necessary medical supplies like masks and other things that hospitals need to function, and to stay inside. And to practice your activism in whatever way you can, because we have to keep saying, like, these things that are happening to our country right now are not okay. The things that are happening to disabled people, to older people, these things are not okay. And we also have to remember that because we could get this virus and we could spread it. If you're a younger person watching this, if you're someone who's an able-bodied person watching this, you could potentially get this virus and you could spread it to everyone you know. And that means if you know someone older, or if you know someone with an immune-compromised disease because of maybe cancer, or who needs a ventilator normally, who has other pre-existing conditions or disabilities, then you could potentially be killing them by spending time with them and by going around your daily life. The best thing to do right now is to stay inside as much as possible and to help those around you, to connect and to uplift the voices of people who are fighting for the rights of disabled people in our country and of older people in our country. And remember that all the medical professionals out there right now, a lot of them are fighting right now, and they're putting themselves in danger. And a lot of them are also being asked to make really hard decisions. And we should remember that that doesn't mean that they get to decide that one person's life is automatically worth more than another person's because they might need a ventilator to survive normally. So we should support our medical professionals, but we should also remember that eugenics should not be given rise right now. We should not allow it to take over kind of how we're thinking, because the history of eugenics in America is really dark. The amount of people who were forcefully sterilized against their will, the amount of people who were killed in institutions, probably wherever you live in America right now, there was an institution near you, and I'm sure there were thousands of people who died in that institution because of completely treatable diseases, or because of medical experiments by the government, or because of abuse. And we should never go back to a time like that. Because if it had gone just one step further, it would have turned into what the Holocaust was. And I would hope that anyone watching this video does not want that for our country right now, with things like the ICE detention camps and with the way our country is currently moving towards. And also would not have wanted that back then. And so we need to push away any of this ideology that mirrors what it was back in the 1920s and 1930s and 40s. So yeah, thanks. I'm gonna maybe post another video soon. I think that I'll probably be posting about something happier. I'm gonna try to make acorn flour, so I might stream some of me making acorn flour. Hopefully this video can upload, because YouTube actually deleted my last stream because it had the word quarantine in it, so I'm gonna try to not use that word and see if my video gets uploaded. But yeah, thanks guys.